It's my feel-good breakfast show.
Yeah, it's time for another edition of one of our favorite slots, our Wednesday feature where we focus on the unconventional side of law. We're calling it So Now What? And we're joined once again by our expert lawyer and director at legalese.co.za, Aitan Stern. There's been a lot of talk in the news recently about the Copyright Amendment Bill. But what does it all mean? How does it affect the creative industry? So this morning, we thought we'd take a look at copyrights in general and unpack exactly how they work. Welcome back, my brother.
Great to be here.
Before we get into it, because I know the bill is quite controversial,
Yeah.
and I think it's better for us to start at least with a general idea of what copyright law actually is. So what is a copyright?
Okay.
and how does it work?
Great question. So this is something which anyone who, any musicians, writers, anyone who creates intellectual property or content for a living should be listening to. So copyright is the legal protection that you get over artistic or literary or music works. So that's the legal term that's given for the rights that you have over it. So when you create something, when you create music, when you write, when you paint, when you do architectural drawings, you get the legal right to own that. It can become your property, and that legal right is called copyright.
Is the creation of it the creation of the copyright? Or do you have to go beyond that to kind of validate that legally to own those rights? If you're just posting pictures that you're kind of drawing or painting online, for instance,
Yeah.
are those copyrighted?
Okay, great question. So the way it works in South Africa, at least, is copyright is an automatic right. So just by the fact that you have created something, you own the copyright.
That's
in it.
awesome.
So if you're what we call the author, if you take a picture, if you write something, if you write a song, if you build a sculpture, you own the copyright in that. There are two relevant exceptions. The one is if you are commissioned to do it. So if someone comes to you and says, look, I want to pay you, 1,000 rand to come take some photos for me, then you're being commissioned. Then whoever did the paying will own it, will own the copyright. And the second exception is if you are employed. It would be a bizarre situation if anyone who had a job owned the work they did at their job. So if you are employed by someone to create content, your employer will own that content.
Is it right across the board for all forms of art? Is art the same as music, the same as a piece of production?
Okay, so also, great question. So the rights that you get over music, art, sculptures, sound, broadcast, they're all called copyright, but they are dealt with differently according to the Copyright Act. So all copyright in South Africa is governed by the Copyright Act of 1978, quite an old act. And while there are all those different types of art that all fall under copyright, they're in different categories, and there are different rights that associate to the different mediums that you're creating.
And I would assume different penalties in terms of how you abuse that.
Totally.
How long does it, since the laws are so old, how long does a copyright actually last? Is it forever?
Okay, so probably nothing is forever, really. But so copyright, so it won't last forever. So depending on the type of copyright, there will be different laws relating to how long it lasts. So if you take, for example, a song, your copyright will last for 50 years after the death of the author. So, so at some point, these things will enter what we call the public domain. So an interesting example, quite a famous one from literally just 3 or 4 years ago, is Happy Birthday, the song.
I was going to ask,
Happy Birthday. Suddenly, the copyright ended, and Happy Birthday now fell into the public domain. So if you're singing Happy Birthday, you're no longer infringing a copyright, whereas just a few years ago you were, and the publishing company that owned the rights to Happy Birthday were making up to $2 million a year on royalties from the use of Happy Birthday.
Yes, I would imagine there are still many victims who are not receiving the rights for work that they've created. We're gonna get into some of the nuances kind of in this very confused space. But it certainly is impressive to me that there is at least a focus on this. I think the online space is where it gets really interesting. So I think that's where we'll pick up in just a moment. Really interesting stuff. Copyrights, if you're in the creative space like we are, whether you're a writer, an artist, someone who's creating music, this is something you really do need to educate yourself around. So stay tuned. So now what? That's a good question when it comes to copyright laws. Time to continue our regular Wednesday legal discussion with the director at legalese.co.za, Eitan Stern. We're talking about copyright laws, which becomes really interesting. We know that there has been a new amendment bill that's been passed that seems to have gotten kind of developed a bit of a furor at the moment, but this obviously in our industry does apply to a lot of the kind of work that we're doing. But one area where it really does hit home for me is online. What is yours? What is someone else's? What happens if you post a picture, a meme that someone else has created, that someone else has copied from? Is there a secondary copyright infringement?
So online is where it gets really interesting, mostly because, well, for two reasons. Firstly, online, social media is built around sharing, whereas copyright is built around trying to own things. So you really are going to see a real conundrum of two values put into play. That's the one reason. The other reason is it's really hard to control what happens on the internet, and the law is never going to, our Copyright Act is from 1978, where social media is only 10 years old. So how does it work? When you own the copyright on something and you post it online, let's say to Facebook or Instagram or Pinterest, you still own the copyright of it. It still is yours. When you do it according to the terms and conditions of that respective website. So if you want to know what that website is allowed to do with your content, go read the terms and conditions. And if you go look at them, they've actually tried to make it really easy to understand. For example, if you post a video on YouTube, if you go to YouTube Legal, they've put a brilliant little video together for you to understand how copyright works. So the rules decide what that site can do with the copyright. But what they don't govern is what other people can do with it. So yes, it is still illegal or unlawful for someone to go and take your image off Instagram and use it. They would be infringing your copyright. However, it's really, really hard to police.
How are you going to prosecute that? And also, if there's no monetary value attached, surely, is that a part of it? If someone is making money out of it, or if someone is just sharing it, are they utilizing it? Where does that line?
100%. So everything in the law has to amount to, in some form, to financial damages. So if you haven't caused any financial harm to a person, then it shouldn't matter. For example, if someone went and took one of my photos of my Instagram, which are not professional photos, it's not really going to cause me much harm. Of course, if they went and used it for an advert, that might cause me some harm because they should have paid me for that. So it really is going to depend on what damage you cause to the person. Remember, like we spoke about last week, the real thing that people have to be aware of is not, invading people's privacy or defaming people. So that's one thing people must be very certain that they're not doing when taking things off other people's Instagrams. Make sure they're not, using them in context that other people wouldn't want them to.
So I'm guessing this is, we've built up to our pinnacle here, the amendment bill itself. So what is, if you can, in a broad stroke, talk us through what has changed in terms of how we now are protected in this creative
So
space.
for one, nothing's changed this yet because the law, it's still a bill, it hasn't become an act. So it's moving through the process, but there's a lot of activity and a lot of people talking about it. Now, it is quite important to update our Copyright Act because it's from 1978, before the cassette player. So it's important to update it. There are some changes that this new bill have brought in. Some of them are quite controversial, and there are many different opinions on it. One of the things that it's brought in is a thing called fair use of certain instances where you are legally permitted, to infringe someone's copyright. For example, if you're using someone's copyright for educational purposes, then you're allowed to. It also sets up a copyright tribunal, and there's some changes to this current act will have effect on older contracts that are signed, and there are lots of changes. I don't think we have enough time to get into it today, but what I can definitely say is that if you are someone out there and you are creating content for a living, music, art, writing, it's definitely worth starting to look into this copyright bill. There's a process at the moment where a lot of people are commenting on it, and it's definitely worth getting educated to see what will change, because it's going to affect everyone's career.
When would it likely become an act?
It's very hard to know. It's been signed by the National Assembly, and now it moves up the process. So it's always a bit hard to know.
Still some gristle to chew on there.
Yeah.
Absolutely love it. Thank you so much. They're really interesting and certainly very important for all of us within a creative space to know as much as possible so we can protect ourselves. A little bit of common sense goes a long way as well, but you can educate yourself along those lines. So now what? Well, it's up to you to pick up the conversation and educate yourself, but we will continue that conversation online at Expresso Show. It's maybe where you can highlight some cases if you've come into contact with copyright issues yourself, maybe share with us and continue to enlighten and educate us.